So for this one, what I want to talk about is, as I mentioned, cutting. And for me, it was really simple. Is for this contest right now, everyone's doing a full print wrap. All right. So for full print, it's very simple rules. It's black and white. You're going to cut on one side and fold the material to the other side, always. So the system that I have for it is what I call empty solid. So for the hood right here, my blade goes behind the hood, and on this edge, it doesn't go behind. So the reason why it doesn't go behind is because the body continues here, so I call that solid. But here, the manufacturer just makes a very thin edge and just takes it back, and there's nothing back here. So for full print wraps, you basically have a sheet that's going to cover the hood to this front piece, and you're going to take it off, and you're going to always, always, always cut on the empty side. And the reason why you cut on the empty side is you simply just want to, there's nothing behind it to wrap. So here I get the material set up here, I run my finger, take my safety box, click my blade, pull it nice and short, and then I'm going to cut on the side of the hood. The reason why is there's nothing behind the side of the hood. So I cut it on this side here, run my finger around so it rounds a little bit, take my squeegee and seal, seal, done. Very simple. So that's what everyone's doing in the competition right now, is they're cutting on the empty side and not wrapping behind the edge because you don't want to leave this empty. You want to cover it. So empty, solid. Simple. Very black and white. But what's interesting is, starting, I would say, around 2008 in Europe and probably around 2011 in America, color change wraps really came on board. And color change wraps are interesting because you want to change the color of the car. With full print, it's a moving billboard. Keep it simple. Clean lines, wrap it, get it out the door. But with color change, it became really murky. And so what I want to do is show a lot of different techniques of how to wrap with color change film to great high quality. And what was interesting is, I would say about 4 years ago, I was in Ireland teaching a workshop at a really innovative company called Sign & Digital. Really cool company. And after I did the workshop, the owner said, I have these guys wrapping 10 Mini Coopers, and they're really struggling. They're taking these black Mini Coopers and they're making them yellow. And I said, what's the problem? He said, 2 guys, and they're good installers, are taking around 16 hours to wrap these cars. I said, oh, cool, I'll come check it out. So I went to the workspace where they're working, and I watched how they wrapped. And here's how they did it. Is basically, and if I'm going to come over here to the edge so you guys can watch on the camera up there, is when they got to, let's say, an empty side on a door, right here. So they're wrapping the door here, is they would take the material, pull it off, squeegee it on, and again, what's interesting about color change is with full print, you got a whole sheet for the side, but with color change, you always have this excess material here. So what they would do is they would then open the door right to here. They'd run the material around the edge, and then they would start wrapping the material behind the door. Taking it behind, if it wrinkled here, they'd use some heat. They'd take it behind, work the material in around every edge. They'd work it around this edge, they'd work it around this edge, and they'd even try to work it around that edge. So what that means is they would take it back about 1 centimeter right here, and then they'd take their blade and they'd cut it off. For me, the problem is, even if you're, there's a lot of great installers at this show today, but if you're cutting right here, what's the chance of you cutting the paint? Really high. Also, it takes a really long time to wrap that material around. The chance of overstretching is really high. And so for me, I was watching that, and I was like, aha, that's where they're losing their time. So what I said is, let me show you a couple tips and tricks for these type of areas, and let's see what happens. And that's what I want to show you now. All right, so for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the material away, and I'm going to close the door again, and I'm just going to show you different options. So here, I'm going to take the material right to the edge, to the top, and down to the side here. So now the door is done. So option number 1 is this. I run my finger here, I take my blade, and notice that I'm always using a plastic knife. I like a plastic knife because if I touch the car with a knife, I'm not going to scratch it. So I have my blade here, and all I'm going to do now is angle my blade as far away from the side of the empty edge as possible. My blade is actually running alongside the edge, but not on the empty side, just on the, not on the solid side, but on the empty side. And what that gets me now is about 1/8 of an inch of material, or about, I would say, about 4 millimeters. So then what I do is I run my finger from top to bottom, and when I shut the door from the side over here, you're going to see red. You're not going to see the original color of the car. So that's step number 1. And you can really do that on a black car. But let's say you have a white car where you can't do that. So I want to show option number 2. Option number 2 is getting the material on, locking it down here, and then I'm going to do the same thing. Open the door again, and the only difference is I'm still going to cut on the empty side of the door, but I'm keeping the door open instead of closed. And with the door open, I can now take my blade almost at a 180-degree angle, top to bottom, and notice my free hand is pulling up as I cut down, so it doesn't get any kind of chatter marks. And by doing that, the material wraps around just a little farther. Then I shut the door, and from the side it looks red. So I'm getting the quality, and I'm getting the speed without having to wrap 3 centimeters behind and cut on the car. But sometimes you get like a really thick edge, for example, right? So what I'm going to do is option number 3, where I take the material, and you can't do this with full print, but you can do it with color change, is I'm going to run my finger from top to bottom, right? But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my blade out just a little tick, because I don't want to cut inside the car. And this time I'm going to cut on what's called the solid side, the back door. My blade is pushing towards the cameraman, towards the left, and then I run my knife down, keep it at a 45-degree angle, remove the excess film, and the only difference now is I can open the door, run my finger around, do my angles first, maybe add a little heat, come down here, do my angle first, then I do the flat area. Always work away from the angles, and then work towards the top. And what this does is it gets me almost like a full centimeter of material that wraps around the edge. Done. So it looks exactly like the same as me taking it around 2 inches, but what I'm avoiding is cutting on the car. So it was really interesting that I do this, let's say on this section of the door here, I cut on the solid side. On the door down, on the rocker panel right here, I'm going to cut on the empty side. And then for here, I'm just going to angle my blade away. It still is going to look red, or in the case of the guys from Ireland, it still looked yellow, but they didn't wrap farther than they needed to. And so for me, that alone, that technique for them on that car took them from 16 hours to 6 hours. So they were spending an extra 20 hours on that car of man hours wrapping too much. And that's when the light bulb went off, when I saw that people were wrapping too far. So for me, these are good options for you on empty cuts. I also want to show you a couple extra tips for empty cuts. And one now involves tri-line, right? Tri-line is really interesting where, let's say I want to do a color change on this hood. And for me, I run the Avery Dennison certification program in North America. And part of that program is you have to wrap the hood for the certification test. So what Avery requires is that you have to wrap around the front of the hood about 1 centimeter. The reason why is it's a high grab point. If I cut the material to the edge of the hood and the customer goes to change their oil, you might pick up an edge. So Avery wants you to wrap farther. But what I see a lot of people do, what I just mentioned earlier, is they'll get the material on the hood to here, they pick the material up, pick the hood up, and then they wrap about 2 centimeters under the hood, and then they cut it away. But a lot of people have failed the certification test because they cut on the car. Because one of the criteria is if you cut the car, you fail. Just like for the wrap contest, if you cut the car, you fail, even if you have a lot of points. Same thing, because if you cut the car, you fail for your customer. So one option for this one here is obviously you could take your blade, super short, and here I'm just going to cut on the small piece, take the material away, and now I got my perfect almost 1 centimeter, run my finger and slide it under, and now I got the wraparound without having to cut directly on the car. This is easy because I got a nice, good, solid line to guide my blade. But what about when you got something like this, right? When you have something like this, where you got a hood and you have like no direct line to cut on, how do you make that line straight, right? I actually picked this tip up from Michael Myers. One of the early videos I had on the Wrap Institute, I was at Ole's shop in Denmark, and Michael Myers said, I picked up this really cool technique for hoods. For the top of the hood, I take tri-line, and I line one string up here, wrap the hood, have the excess material here, and you pull the third string out, and then it wraps around the top of the hood. And I thought, oh, that's cool. But I never really used it much because I always thought if I angle my blade far enough away that I don't need to use that. So I tabled it for a long time. But then when I kept on seeing people cut the front of the hood of the car, what I started doing now is this. Instead of using it on the top of the hood, I'm now using it at the front of the hood. So what I do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to take tri-line. You can use 6 millimeter. It comes in 6 millimeter and it also comes in 9 millimeter, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the tri-line here all the way across. And what I really want you to pay attention to is I try to make that string as symmetrical as possible and as high as possible here. Then, before I, let's say, wrap the hood, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick it up and I'm actually going to cut away the inside 2 lines. What that does is it makes the third line almost just like their design line. So here I can pull the string, and then imagine this is on the fender, so I lock it on the fender with a pre-release. Then I wrap the hood like I normally do. So I come back here for the hood wrap, take my squeegee now, lock it in, come down, get it in place. So I'm over the tri-line here, and all I do is I run my finger so the material kind of goes this way. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the line, pull, and it cuts it away perfectly, where now, if I pull the rest of the tri-line out, I can run my finger and you can see what I get. I get a perfect 1/4 inch of material, or let's say 1/2 centimeter material, that I can now get that, if you're trying to work with Avery Dennison, or let's say this case Hexus, now I get that wraparound without having to cut on the car. Awesome stuff. So again, tri-line for me is a really cool technique. So this is what I like about, let's say the Wrap Institute or traveling across the world, is I can pick up techniques where one person is using it at the top of the hood, where I can use it at the front of the hood, and I get super good quality without having to cut on the car. So again, lots of different options of creating that quality and speed. Do I spend a little money on tri-line? Sure. But do I make money because I'm home quicker? Yes. Very good technique for that. So cool thing for here. So now what I want to also talk about is, again, different ways to get inside this area without using your knife, all right? So there's a really cool tool from Knifeless Tape, or from Yellow Tools, sorry. So Yellow Tools has this cutter, and what it is a blade that has a beveled edge right here on both sides, and it's a live blade. It's constant. So the trick for this one is I can use this on a vehicle between the gaps. So let's say I'm right here on the hood, pick the material up, lock it down, and let's say here I don't feel comfortable. Let's say if you're a new installer, this tool is particularly good for people who are beginners, is a lot of owners don't let the beginners cut on the car right away because they might cut the car. So even an installer here might be cutting here and they might jump out and you cut the paint. So a very safe way to do this is using this beveled tool from Yellow Tools, okay, Sasson cutter. So basically what I do is I put it in here and it can roll back and forth, but the blade is only out, let's say about, I would say 1/2 centimeter, so there's no chance of me cutting inside the body, where now I can just roll it. I'm pushing towards the car, but there's no chance of it coming out. I pull the material away, and now I got this perfect wraparound that slides under. Really cool tool. So for me, it comes in different widths for different types of cars, but I can use this anywhere. I can use it even between the gap between the front light. I don't want to cut here. I can use it alongside the fender and the hood. Cool stuff. So lots of different ways I can use this knife without cutting on the car. So for me, really, I mean, it's an investment. Maybe it costs like 20 or 30 bucks, but for me, it pays off because you save time, you get the quality, you get the wraparound, and you get that, price point for me, which is making money in time. So here we got this. So we got the cutter from Yellow Tools. So this is kind of what I think about for empty cuts. And on this car, where are your empty cuts on this car? The hood, doors, maybe the back of the trunk or the boot if you're from England. So those are what you want to do for empty cuts. Now where it gets very interesting for me is solid cuts for color change. All right. So for solid cuts, what does that mean? It means inside the body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open this hood so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to pick the material up, lock it down, and let's say we're wrapping the fender of this car. So I'm going to pick it up, lock it in to here. Now, where it gets interesting when you're wrapping cars is if you're wrapping the fender piece here, the actual manufacturer takes the paint all the way to here. So you got all these bolts. And what I see on Instagram a lot is people will be like, okay, I wrapped this fender in like Hexus red. And they wrap these bolts and they wrap down here and stuff like that. And when I see that, I just get sad. All right, the reason why I get sad is that just tells me they took a long time to wrap it. I mean, to wrap this stuff is cool and it's stony and it gets you a lot of likes on Instagram. But for me, it doesn't get you home at 5 o'clock. I mean, unless the customer's saying, I want this red, and they pay for it, cool. But if you're doing it as part of your wrap, you're going to lose time and money, all right? So the problem is, when you're coming in with the material here, is once you're bringing the material here, where do you cut, all right? With what I just showed you on the empty cuts, you could cut on the side of the fender, you could use the tri-line, you could use all that stuff. But here, where do you cut? And most oftentimes, you're going to cut on the body. So to avoid cutting with your knife, what you're going to use is knifeless tape. So instead of cutting here, you're going to come in with, in this case, 3M design line, and you're going to run design line most likely right here on the body line, on the outside. So you're going to run it there beforehand, pick up the material, feed it in, cut it out. Very simple. And you're going to do it, let's say, on the back door, you're going to do it on the front door, the gap between the front door. So this is pretty standard. Everyone knows this, all right? But what I want to show is little tips and tricks that maybe you don't have to do that. All right? My goal is to, in some ways, turn color change wraps into full print wraps. What do I mean by that? I'm going to go back to shutting the hood. Come down here, drop it. And I'm going to grab a piece just for demonstrations, make it a little tinier to here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the material up, lay it on the fender, and I'm going to run my finger here and take my knife now, and I'm going to cut it on the side of the hood, treating it like it's a full print. Release the excess material here, run my finger, take my squeegee and seal it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open the hood again so you can see how short I came. So right now I'm trying to cover farther, especially if this was a white car, you'd really see it. Lock it here, and you can see that the material now didn't reach the point that I wanted, right to here, right? I wanted the material to come down to here, but by cutting with the hood closed, I come short. How do I get around that? How I get around that is maybe by being a little creative, right? This is a really cool tool from a company in America called Excel, right? This is what's called a dual cutter. What they use this for is for creating stripes on, or cutting a gap on window perf. So you have your window perf, and they want you to cut it away from the molding. That's cool if you were into that technique, but I never thought of it for that. What I thought of it for was this. So I'm going to take this over here, and I'm going to walk over here if you don't mind. And you can make adjustable widths. So I can make this wider or narrower. And then what I can do is I can take a scrap of material, and most of the time I use carbon, and I can make my own stripes on location. So by doing this now, I could do it in the same color I'm wrapping with, or I could use it in, let's say, carbon, and I'll come back over here. And what I can do now is I can lay this on either before, or in this case I'm doing it after because I'm working with matte film, and I can lay this in as a stripe. And for me, what I like about this is generally I'm going to use carbon. I mean, if I use carbon, customers like it because it's, you know, an exotic film. But for me, imagine every time they open up the hood, they saw a little sliver of carbon. They would actually pay extra for that. But what I know in my head is it's quicker, and I'm using a dual cutter film, and I'm using scraps, and in a way I'm upselling my client's scraps, but I'm saving a tremendous amount of time because I don't even have to use knifeless tape anymore. I just use that piece. I could do it beforehand, again, with gloss, because gloss on gloss sticks really good, or I can do this, or there's even a tool out there called Mold and Hold, which is a pre-cut strip, because what's right here inside the car? Molding. Right? And this mold and hold looks exactly like molding. If I put a strip of mold and hold right there, the customer wouldn't even notice it. So again, I'm trying to save a lot of time by doing that on cars. There's different types of tricks of putting little stripes on these sections that get me home by 5 o'clock as opposed to 5 o'clock in the morning. Really interesting. So for me, cutting down on cutting is one of the biggest things that people do is instead of over-wrapping and wrapping inside all these areas or wrapping deep inside here, why not put a stripe here? Or cut it on the side of the hood and wrap under and let the material and the car kind of guide your blade and get you those time-saving techniques. So lots of little tips and tricks out there with the knifeless tape, the tri-line, the dual cutter, that tool from Yellow Tools. By having that in my toolkit, I mean, if you notice that Tadashi, he was in the second round, I mean, his tool bag was the biggest tool bag you've ever seen in your life. I mean, he has every tool imaginable in there, but because he has those tools and he has the right tools for every situation that he gets in, he saves a lot of time and money, and that's why he's one of the leading installers in Japan. So it's really cool when you have the right tools and you open into it and you go online and you see what everyone's doing and you can purchase them, and that's why Yellow Tools has a great stand there, 20% off. Really cool stuff. So does anyone have any questions on what I just did in terms of material? all that kind of stuff. And I would do the same thing for chrome, do the same thing for carbon, do all that kind of stuff. So even here, imagine like a chrome inlay right there. Every time the client opens up, they say chrome. Lots of cool time-saving techniques, and I really particularly like the one with the tri-line here that saves a lot of time that comes from Michael Myers. So really cool stuff that you're picking up, really cool tips and tricks, tools from America, tips and tricks from Germany, all that good stuff. So that's the name of the game today, is saving time and money, creating that quality without ever letting your knife touch directly on the car, let it go alongside the car. So hope you enjoyed this demo. Tomorrow's demo will be more about relief cuts and how to relax the material onto the car without using a heat gun, which for me also saves a lot of time and money and keeps the material intact. So thanks for watching. Justin Pate.